UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
Welcome, everybody, to UAP Crossfire, the show that has a whole bunch of alpha males debating the biggest secret in the world. Are we alone? And it looks like maybe we're not. So anyways, we're going to be doing a lot of discussion tonight about different things, and we're going to get into Orbs with our special guest that's going to be coming on, named Bob Spearing. He's the International Director of MUFON. He does all the international cases around the world. And also we're going to talk a little bit about that egg sighting. I call it the egg sighting because I'm not sure really if it's true or what it is. And then we got a little thing for Don Eckert. Too bad Don's not with us tonight because he's not feeling well, but we're going to kind of show something that we picked up, and I think you'll like it. So first, let me introduce everybody that's on the screen here. Below me, he's probably one of the greatest helicopter pilots in the world.
Oh,
Commander
far from that.
You do a great job. You're a credit to the service, my friend, and stuff.
Thank you very much. Is it going to be egg sighting?
It's going to be slightly egg sighting.
Okay,
it's
just
going
want
to
to throw that in there.
The
There's just so many softballs that you put up in that I just felt like I'd go with the egg sighting.
Yeah, the egg sighting. And of course, we got Dan the Padre Carlson.
Good evening,
Dan, how'd you do on the other show? I heard that you did an exorcism show. I couldn't watch it because I'm scared to death of exorcism.
I had a good time. I was on Sacred Divisions with Bishop Long. We covered a wide range of subjects and could have probably gone another 2 hours the way things were going, but it was a lot of fun.
Amazing. That's great. Well, listen, I want to start off the show. I got this video from a helicopter pilot, and it was amazing, and it kind of parallels what Commander Cobra said at the other show. And I think it's important because I think when you get people who are in the know about helicopters, helicopter pilots, and flying, and you listen to them, you'll kind of find out that this video is a little strange that they've been touting around on News Nation. Anyways, let me play the video, and I'll get everybody's reaction.
22-year Army veteran with both military intelligence and aviation background, I spent the last 17 years of my career flying AH-64 Apaches, OH-58 Kiowas, and UH-1 Huey helicopters. After reviewing the existential video from Jake Barber, I can say without a doubt the video did not involve a helicopter. I estimated the distance between the egg and the helicopter to be about 100 feet. That is if the egg is 20 feet long as purported. Yet the cable system seems calm and stable. Any cargo helicopter like a CH-47 or even utility helicopters like Blackhawks or Sea Stallions would have significant rotor wash to disrupt the cable with visible cable waves in rocking motion, especially when the egg is offloaded from the cable. At that point, the cable gains wave energy from the rotor turbulence and begins to move more violently. This did not happen in this video. The cable stayed stable and calm after offloading the egg-shaped craft. Also, if you hear sounds of helicopter blades working a cable system under the transmission and engines, the audio is fake. All you hear directly underneath helicopter transmission and engines is the high whine of the transmission and engines. Also, the rotor wash on the ground at the point of release of the cargo is so significant that it can actually brown out the load, or in this case, the objects being carried. Since the surface did not look like concrete but a field, there's no way that you would not be able to detect the rotor wash effect. Having direct experience moving large cargo under utility helicopters successfully, I also noticed the cable terminates well above the egg, and it looks like there's thread-like strings that are coming out from the bottom. I don't recall ever having a load that didn't have a pintle hook where you can hook the cables or straps in. This just seems to be terminating and there's just strings coming out the bottom. That is not what is normally used for sling load or recovery operations. The cargo release is not complete either when the video ends, so we don't get a chance to see how they detached the cable from the egg-shaped craft. And in fact, you see the cable moving off to the left and the egg starting to roll to the right. And that's not normally how you offload a object like this. Real world loads you would detach immediately once the cargo was safely on the ground to ensure the aircraft can depart without incident. In this video, no one's on the ground to ensure the load is detached or stabilized, and in fact the egg begins to roll to the opposite direction of the cable being moved. The video strikes me as one of an amateur attempt to simulate what was being claimed by Jake Barber. What I can say with high level of confidence is this video does not show a real helicopter recovery operation, and that's just my 2 cents worth.
All right, so that's the video, and I'm going to start with Commander. What do you think of this guy, and what do you think of his theory?
Well, when we talked about this, Chris, I thought him and I drew a lot of the same conclusions. I like his perspective. It got me thinking that this, as I wrote to you, possibly we're talking about something that's being done with a crane. Just looking at how static it is, and that means the dimensions of what's reported might be a lot different. So it might be a much smaller egg payload, and it might be a crane that's doing it. Just looking at how it's moving and what he was talking about with the cable. But even that is interesting, how little is being done. One thing I will draw everyone's attention to, the more rope-like lines that are attached to the egg in that saddle cradle, almost blanket type structure that connects up to the main cable, might be some of the reason why you're not seeing a lot of motion. Obviously, you're not having any downward rotor kind of wash onto it that's causing any kind of movement. So you may have a much stiffer lifting cable. But I think his conclusions are very, very accurate. I agree with a lot, if not everything that he said. And I think the absence or how quickly this has dropped, just not seeing more, is interesting. So we're either being set up for the next big reveal, the next big piece of footage that's going to come out, or like many of the things that pop up, this one just may go into the, not talked about anymore file.
The one thing that I got struck by that video that I thought was amazing what he said, is says that the actual sound pitch of the video doesn't sound like a helicopter.
Oh, yeah, I told you that from the beginning. That
right.
was BS.
Right, but nobody's really picking up on that except you and.
Well, if you've been inside a helicopter, you're correct. First of all, with a helmet, you're not going to generally hear a lot, and all you're going to hear is a high pitched whine of the transmission, because it's usually right underneath where you're lifting from, or the engines. And
also with the cable, he says the rotor wash would swing that cable a lot more than what it's too steady, he says. Right, it is. It's very steady. I told you that was very unusual, so it would either be very, very high. And the other part that's interesting is what he's saying is that when the load is no longer putting on a gravitational pull, when it's not putting a pull onto the cable, as soon as you get within that distance to take the load off the cable, meaning the thing you're slinging is no longer being suspended underneath the aircraft, then you're going to start to have some slack. You don't have that gravitational pull on it, and it's going to react more to what you would be presumably the downward thrust of the rotors. And of course, there's nothing moving on the ground. So given what we have and how it's packaged, I think the sound is a little bit amateurish, and we've all kind of reacted to that from the beginning. Yeah. Sounds like the egg is a soft egg. That's about it. Anyways, Padre, so you saw David Toombs, you heard Commander. What's your take on all this?
A lot of the same things, the lack of prop wash or rotor wash, sorry. Another thing that's always been troubling me since I saw this is you obviously have precious cargo if this is an extraterrestrial craft, and there are no ground personnel on hand to receive it, to keep it from rolling, or it's just kind of plopped in the middle of nowhere, no evidence of anyone else in the vicinity.
It's not covered. I mean, for a secret unit to have a secret project with a secret object, it wasn't very secret, was it?
No.
Like I said, the only explanation I can give for that is that you have a small clip of where it was lifted out of something and you were headed to someplace else and you had a problem and you put it down. That's the only explanation I can give you why you don't have a prepared area that is going to a pad area, maybe a vehicle or a container of some kind for it to go into. This is just the part where the load started to move around and you had a problem. But if that's the case, all the other things don't add up either. You're not seeing any rotor wash, which means even in the most obscure and dust blown areas where you've had other helicopter area, you're going to see some kind of movement. That's not it's just not detectable in the clip we have, and the sound is amateurish after you talk to people that have been around it. Now, is that intentional? Might be. It could be part of just trying to throw you off.
Now, let me ask you this. That you raise an interesting point, Commander. So how does that fit with Jake Barber's credibility? Because everybody's saying, oh, my God, he's a whistleblower. He's directly involved. And then at the same time as he's giving this information out, they show a video that's extremely suspicious.
Right.
And now you have Jake Barber's I call it testimony, but his interview is now under suspicion.
Right. So again, this is like people that stand up in front of Congress, talk about people being executed for what they have seen or what they've been around. And okay, next question.
Yeah, you're right. And to me, I think that it throws the whole interview into suspicion.
Dan. And I think that's ultimately the goal. I don't think these are real. They're not targeted for true disclosure. They may be probing for others to come out. They may be looking to see where the conversations go on the social media and on the different nets. We've talked about that in the past. I view everything suspiciously on that. And it's not because of what's there. It's because of what isn't there that we're having a lot of the discussion, and there's not a lot of good companion. I've had great people who listen to the show that have sent me their takes on the longer interviews and the stuff that was said in those interviews, and I've gone through a lot of the stuff, but I'm lacking complete understanding. What is the objective here, and I'm suspicious. And if nothing, the last couple of weeks of what has been coming out. What's due to come out in the assassination files when they are opened will tell us a lot, but it's obvious that we have had huge amounts of disinformation or whatever term you want to use that's been going on for decades.
I agree with a lot of that. The only thing that I question is anything that the CIA is going to put out, I think they're going to sabotage it. I mean, even if they bring out the JFK files, the MLK files, and the RFK files, I think they're going to make themselves look.
Yeah, they're going to do a lot of redaction. But when the official file comes out, what has been out before, what people have received from various sources over the years, there are at least some comparison points, and that's what we have to do. Don't have a lot on this particular egg video to compare it to anything else,
right?
On activities out there, but we do have some other activities. Again, I find this much like the Capitol Hill testimonies and the other things gone on. It just goes quiet very, very quickly. We live in such a fast news cycle now that if you don't continue to feed the beast goes on to something else.
They say 48 hours and then the story dies because you got something else happening in the United States. Dan,
I think
now
that,
that you've seen this video,
Uh-huh.
do you think this brings Jake Barber's interview into question? I mean, now you got Ross Coulthart there showing that video, and he's supposed to be an authority, getting to be a big authority on UFO and ufology. And now you got this Jake Barber who says, yeah, I mean, I've had this soul-searching feeling as I was transporting this object, and everybody's saying that's a phony film. And I think it is.
You know, I have some problems. And once he moved from just the credible special forces man into summoning objects with psionics and things such as that. Another thing that I've observed is in the days leading up to the initial release of this, Ross Coulthart was everywhere. He was on all kinds of media and social media promoting it. And since it's been on, where's he been? I mean, the last thing I saw from him was about the JFK files, and that was a day or two ago, but he hasn't been back talking about this much at all. I heard that it's either today or tomorrow, Mr. Baker is supposed to be on a documentary of some kind that's going to get more into this. But it just seems to me that this has taken kind of a weird turn more into the psionics than the craft itself. And I personally, I'd be more interested in the aliens and the craft than I would be in psychic manipulation and so forth.
Well, I'm very suspicious of this new word, the flavor of the month psionics, because they're talking about how you can call down these crafts and they'll come when you call. And, and same thing with CE5 or CS5 or NS5. I don't know what it is, but I mean, what they do out in the desert. But I mean, I don't think you can just call down an advanced civilization. At least I have not had the experience of somebody who said to me, Chris, I can show you, let's do this. I've heard about it. I've heard people talk about it, but I've never seen any actual proof. Dan, do you think this is real?
If it is real, my background would dictate that he's being more manipulated than he thinks, and that he might be under the control of an interdimensional or spiritual entity who's putting things into his mind. There's no doubt in my mind he sincerely believes what he is saying, but as to the actual validity of it, it comes into question. He's talking about having people that he's working with that can summon these things, and not only that, they can take them over and fly them.
Yeah.
I mean, I get into a Tesla and I don't know what button to push. I mean, you go into
that's because you're not willing to have the brainstem insert. So let's just knock that off then.
Oh, so I got to do the Matrix thing with the thing in the back.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're
willing to put that,
you just plug right into the headrest. No steering, no nothing. You just off you go.
Yeah, I'm skeptical.
No, I do think there's, I do believe that there's technology that you can mine. I call it mind melting because I can't get the Star Trek thing out of my head. But I think there's a way that, planes will, or if they haven't already, but planes will have thought patterns that the pilot could have, and the plane will do what the thought patterns are telling them to do. There will come a time, if not already, that we probably have that technology or will have it. But to summon extraterrestrial crafts, Commander, what do you think of he was almost, in tears and everything else that he was talking about. And I don't buy it.
Well, he earnestly experienced something. I'm not going to question the validity of what he experienced. He experienced something. Here's kind of my take on it. Since we haven't had a mass reveal where we've had the day the earth stood still kind of moment, if you are one of these people that has been selected to be tuned into the frequency and the ability to do this, I would think that if our extraterrestrial friends are trying to keep onto the program that they set up, they're not going to pick somebody who's going to reveal it until they decide it's going to be revealed. So that's, to me, if you're selected to be part of that program, I don't see how that's a ticket to start giving away secrets before those that are the secret are willing to give it up, if that makes sense. So obviously, I think that's happened, or something happened that is emotionally searing to him, and he's experiencing that. I've seen the same kind of thing in religious circles with people. I've seen the same kind of thing with people that were post-traumatic stress that experienced something, and they somehow actually determined something beautiful out of a tragedy because they survived, or what they saw, or they saw a good side to it, and they're forever connected to it. So the manifestation of what he's expressing doesn't surprise me. I think a lot of folks that experience this absolutely believe it. I'm not one to call them a liar. It's just that I can't, without it being confirmed and to a way that I can understand it, and it's probably my shortcoming in that situation. I'm sorry, but I'm having a hard time buying it. And that's always very difficult because I've had people, Dan will be nodding here in a second. I believe in a God that isn't readily seeable to most people, but I completely believe in the experience that I have with an element of that God. And I see that in everything around me. I experience that with my animals. I experience that with everything that I walk on the oceans or in the forest with up here. So I get that. I think I can explain that. I have at least a couple thousand years of philosophers that kind of point to the same kind of thing that gives us some level of connection to it. But you're showing me something, and then you're tying other things into it. It's not very long video, and it gets convoluted. And the other part is this. You are a long list of people. You're in a long list of people that have shown up, told me this, have somewhat competing stories or experiences. We have good experiences. We have bad. We have really, really bad experiences. And we're just not at the point where we can thread it all together. I think it does fit. It's just I haven't seen enough of the pieces to fit it. I think I understand it. But again, I'm not a person who expects that I have to have it to believe what I believe. It's just that simple to me.
Here's the two things that bother me, guys. One, if people have the ability to call down these ships and control them, as the Padre said, right? There's people who say they can call up a ship and they can control it. Well, if I can control a ship, why don't I land it on Main Street in downtown Buffalo or downtown New York City? But nobody's ever done that. So if you can control a ship and you can make it fly and do whatever you want, one of these people have to turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to park it right over here at Yankee Stadium, let everybody see it. And that hasn't happened. So that makes me a little suspicious. And the other thing that makes me suspicious about this, and I'm as you said, Commander, I would never call a person a liar, but I'm suspicious because I've done all kinds of abduction cases with MUFON. I've interviewed, all kinds of people who claim to have abductions. And I will tell you, 99.9 have never had a good feeling. They've been terrified. They've been screaming. They wake up with nightmares. Their feelings are such horror. They're moving through a wall that they don't understand how they could go through that. They're on a metal table that they're being dissected. They're being stuck with needles and probes, and nobody is giving them anything for pain. They're telling them basically in a mental telepathy, oh, we're not going to hurt you. And the pain is unbelievable. And they have nightmares and nightmares afterwards. And I've heard nobody tell me what a beautiful experience. So when I hear Jake, and obviously there's got to be something for him to say this, I don't know what it is yet. I'd like to find out. But it just goes against the norm of what I've heard from people who've had encounters. and their encounters have been so traumatic that, I mean, some of them are having these nightmares and have PTSD like a soldier would have and stuff. Your comments on that? Whoever
Well,
wants to go first.
when you have a traumatic experience, sometimes the brain will attempt to create an alternate reality to that experience in order to bandage it or to hide it, hide the reality of it from you. If you understand what I'm saying, it's a defensive mechanism that the brain has
Right,
to
for preservation.
just to extract yourself from the horrible reality and replace it with something that's far more pleasant to take your mind off of that. And that just takes a lot of counseling. Sometimes it takes some regression and other therapies just to kind of unpeel each layer to get at what was real in that situation. And I'd be interested to know if Mr. Baker has undergone any of that kind of therapy.
Absolutely. Commander, final thoughts on that?
I don't like to take a negative tact. I like what's been shared, what has been presented and said around the clip doesn't add up to me. It has a lot of holes. People that are involved in this kind of function, if they're coming out, should be able to very quickly give you a lot of information in a very short amount of time. The type of aircraft, what they were doing, how much it weighed, how it flew. There's a lot of things there that the average pilot engaged in this could present and give explanation. And if things didn't add up, well, we had to add the soundtrack for the effect and just own up. We put that in there because we wanted the soundtrack effect on that. There's lots of things. NASA got caught during the moon landings with staged pictures because they wanted to have really good pictures of moon operations because they were looking for kind of the Madison Avenue approach. There's some stuff in there that was mixed in with the rip. That's an unfortunate thing when you do that, trying to, what I consider one of the greatest things we're ever involved in, to kind of sell the product a little bit, this, to show the parts that you want to really glamorize out of it. I think when you look at what really was done, I don't think you have to glamorize any of it. But there's always somebody who figures there's a better way to do it. I see it in religion all the time, right? We're not happy with getting the I don't care what faith it is. Hmm. Then you have to have somebody come along. Well, we got to dress this up a little bit. We got to glam it up just a tiny bit because that's what's going to get people, put butts in the seats, butts in the pews. It's wrong. It's wrong.
You're right.
And I think we're seeing the same thing. But this aligned with people that are showing up at Congress and then nothing, reps and senators coming out saying, and behind closed doors, I could not believe what I had. And then you go and continue to vote for another $1 trillion worth of debt, and there's no explanation anywhere. And I'm supposed to go, great, we're getting it all done. It's all working someplace. Sorry, I'm not buying it.
Well, I agree with you. I want to get to something else too, Commander, that we talked about, because I'm really fascinated with your insight on aviation. So I saw a tape, and I'll probably get it and put it on the later part of the show just so you could see it. But I was fascinated that years ago they developed a remote-controlled helicopter that they actually took. I think it was a Black Hawk or a
Hero. Yeah. That's right now. Lockheed's working on it. That's flying right now.
Right. They actually showed a demonstration of it, right, that Lockheed Martin can actually control a helicopter right
We've
from the
been
ground.
doing that. There was a Command helicopter that has the two interlocking main rotor blades. That's been flying and doing remote ops for the last 10 years.
Okay.
It's the same way that you would fly a Predator or any other airplane from a ground-based station. Helicopters are a little bit more demanding because you have more control axes that you want to put inputs to. Both the helicopters that they're doing with it very successfully, that are existing helicopters that would be manned or optionally manned in these cases, are very stable helicopters. So
I was going to ask Commander, the Navy also has a remote helicopter for
Yes, that was the Firehawk.
Yeah.
Which was actually based on one of the first helicopters I flew, believe it or not. It's based on a Hughes, which became Schweitzer 300. So, yep, that's the Firehawk.
Okay, so that's a real technology. Now, here's
that's been around a long time.
Right. Could that have been on the Black Hawk that crashed?
Probably not. No, there would be no reason for a VH-90 from that unit to be flying that way. They may have had some. They don't know for sure about the voice recorder and some of the data recorder. Some of the aircraft. You're talking a fleet of over 1,200 helicopters in the Black Hawk or the Hawk family. So there's lots of variants. Some are instrumented certain ways. Some are not. So no, there wasn't any ground taking over that helicopter and causing that. Not that I could see. I would be very, very surprised if anything like that ever were to come.
I'm just wondering if they were doing a training mission.
No, not in that airspace. Okay. Although it's funny you say that, because one of those demonstrations of the Kaman helicopter that I was telling you about, the remote control helicopter that they successfully flew missions with in Afghanistan, did fly in that cipher. And I was out flying the same time it was out, and they were flying it over there's an urban warfare fighting area near Fort Apache in that area that has a urban environment that you can practice, surveillance and fighting and rooting out bad guys and all that kind of stuff. You can do training in it. And they were flying in that airspace, and there was airliners flying around us and all that kind of stuff. And it was over by Quantico. So it did work in that kind of complex airspace. It wasn't at night, and we weren't flying on the routes. That's a VFR route that takes you specifically up into DC, and they were practicing for a very specific mission that they were flying on. I can give you one more input on this horrible crash. There's a lot talked about the helicopter being at the wrong altitude. Any place from 150 feet to almost 200 feet above the altitude it's supposed to be at. One of the things that's been going around, a lot of people have not been able to determine, and it's kind of linked to possibly the lack of air traffic control in the tower, because this was a tower-controlled movement. It wasn't a radar-controlled movement. Is that when you check into airspace, you're usually told an altimeter setting. And on the altimeter, you have a twisting device on the face of it. It's called the Colsman window, or in some of the new helicopters, you actually punch in the digits, and it's given as inches of mercury or millibars on the European system. So you can have two aircraft that have the same setting in their altimeters. And when you fly, your altimeter has to be within 75 feet of whatever you've been told is the altitude. So usually before you depart, you're on the ground, you will set the proper altimeter setting. You would put that in. And when you look at that, that has to be within 75 feet of the altitude that's set. So you know that you're within calibration. So even two aircraft can have that variation between the two. But that's how you maintain some semblance. And if you're not told on the tower, when you check in, you can check into an automated radio frequency at almost every field in the country has one. And there's an automated system that reads this pressure setting that you put in, and it'll give you a letter. It'll say information Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, altitudes. And when you check in with your controller, you tell them that you have information and whatever the letter was, phonetically said. That tells the controller that you have the latest information. If that changes while you're flying and you're not expected to go back to that automated, you would be told again. And you have to read it back. You have to tell them. If they tell you it's 3011, you have to repeat 3011 back so they know that you got the right number with the assumption that you're putting it in. That doesn't appear to have happened in this particular part. So when they checked in, they may have been flying on the wrong Colsman setting, and they thought they were at the right altitude, which would throw them up. That's a lot of it's the difference in the altitude is a huge error on the altimeter. But it could be a contributing factor.
Would that be the responsibility of the pilot or the air traffic control?
Both.
Okay, so there goes with that. All right, I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit, and I wanted to talk about this because I was fascinated that MUFON has been able to get Leonard Stringfield's diaries. Now, for people who don't know about Leonard Stringfield, one of the greatest ufologists there ever was. The man was amazing. The man had personal diaries, and he had sources from all over the intelligence field and the military field. And MUFON was able to get his personal diaries. I think there's like 65 books of notes, field notes, articles, everything else. And it's amazing. It's actually very frightening that there's 5 people in the United States right now that are redacting these diaries because there's certain names we don't want out to the public. They're still living, and what's in the diaries can be dangerous, actually dangerous to some people. And I think Bob will be talking more about it. But there was one name that we found in the diary. Actually, our guest found it, and I just want to show. Leonard Stringfield didn't really trust a lot of people, but there was 5 people that he did trust, 5 or 6 people he did trust, and he named them in the diary. And he swore these people to secrecy, and then he released them from secrecy. And one of them is actually one of our hosts, Don Eckert. And I'm going to pull up the diary here. And as you can see, it says, several have gained my trust over the last few months. Those people are Tom Mickus, Don Eckert, Stanley Freeman, Byron Smith, John Lear, and other one who's choosing not to be identified. I'm releasing this information at this time to the public, and I'm releasing those named people from their bond of silence regarding the subject. So I really wanted to get Don here to find out what Leonard Stringfield told them, because, I mean, this guy was one of the most secretive guys there was. And when these diaries come out to the public, they'll be I was astonished when I read this stuff. I actually called Bob up, our guest, and I said, Bob, this stuff is absolutely amazing and stuff of that nature. And also, we found Don's name in this, where that Stringfield says that he also direct you to Don Eckert's spook.doc. I've never heard Don ever talk about that.
I think that's back in the day when he was putting the very first DOS files up, and he's talked about the stuff that was maintained on that old server, that old computer that he was using. That looks like the type of device that would be.
Yeah, but can you imagine being trusted by one of the very few people that Leonard Stringfield trusted?
Well, I trust you two, and I've known Don a little bit longer, and I felt that way with him, even though he has snarled a few times at me over the years.
Well, his rants. I mean, everybody loves his rants.
No, not everybody.
Okay, I didn't call that guy for a comment, but I will tell you that I do enjoy Don's rants at times. Padre, do you know anything about Leonard Stringfield? Have you? I mean, obviously, you must have heard of him.
I don't. I'm intrigued by that spook.doc, though, as to what that involves. And that's something we got to put a pin in and really ask Don about next time we see him.
Well, we will. But I'm going to tell you, we're going to start off with the Leonard Field diaries, because we're going to bring on Bob Spearing. Now, Bob Spearing is the Director of International Investigations for MUFON, one of the most skilled investigators that is in the organization. I respect him. He is a great photo analysis person. He does wonderful work. He really takes everything, thoroughly does an investigation. You can't find anybody better to do it than him. One of the amazing things that he does is he puts patterns together. You can look at different things that you wouldn't see it. Bob can there and look at the patterns, and he could look at just pictures or an article and say, okay, this goes with something that happened in 1952. That goes with something that happened in 1949. That is the same thing that happened in 1974. And I'm just stunned every time I talk to him. He's just amazing that way. So I'm going to bring Bob Spearing on. Bob, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. And a little later on, we're going to be talking about your expertise in orbs. I find that very fascinating. But let's talk about the Stringfield Diaries, Bob.
Okay, so several years ago, over the past 20 years, MUFON had acquired a lot of historical information that they were scanning over a number of years. And it turned into what we call our Project Aquarius digital library with 2 terabytes of information, including all the old MUFON paper reports that were mailed into us in the 60s, 70s, and 80s before we went digital. We have collections from various researchers, including Stringfield. We have all of the MUFON journals since 1969, most of the symposium proceedings since 1971, a drawings gallery of witness drawings that has over 12,000 drawings right now. And we also have the Captain Ruppelt Blue Book personal files in our collection. But the main thing we got were the Leonard Stringfield diaries. There are 65 of them. They're about 200 pages each, something like 12,000 pages. It's not all, it's typewritten, the entries, but also included, there's some pastings of newspaper clips and correspondences and letters, but it's a fascinating insight into Stringfield. For people who don't know about Leonard Stringfield, he began in the 1950s with a newsletter called CRIFO, CRIFO, and it was basically sort of like a flying saucer digest type of publication. And he did that for several years. He wrote a book in the 1950s, and then he came to prominence in the 70s when he started to investigate crash retrievals. His diaries go from the mid-1970s up until just before his death in 1990. And he had a lot of sources in the CIA, in the NSA, bureau chiefs. And I'll just give you one sentence out of one of the diaries. He was corresponding with a CIA bureau chief who gave him some very, very sensitive information, and Stringfield wanted to publish it. And this CIA bureau chief wrote to Stringfield and says, "Len, if they're not afraid to kill Kennedy, they're not afraid to kill a CIA bureau chief." So I always found that one of the most chilling sentences that I came across. I'm part of the redacting team. As you mentioned earlier, some of this stuff is so sensitive that some of the people may still be alive, that we had to take their names out. Also, there's private citizens who wrote letters to Stringfield, and they did it without knowing whether or not this material would ever be published, so we redact witness names also. Newspaper clippings, we don't redact. Correspondences that Stringfield had, say, with Hynek or with Stanton Friedman, we didn't redact. But there's just a whole fascinating amount of information that are coming out as we go through these diaries. Right now, in our Project Aquarius digital library, 5 of the diaries so far have been doubly redacted and put up for the general public to see. Well, you have to get a subscription for $50 a year to get the whole 2 terabytes that we have in our library. But we've uploaded 5 of the 65 diaries so far that have been fully redacted.
Bob, can you tell us, in the ones that have been released, what you find interesting in them? A little bit what Leonard Stringfield was investigating?
Yeah, some of it I can't really go into deeply with you guys because we're going to bring it out at the symposium in July in Cincinnati. But one curious thing we came across was a very, very old version of the Rendlesham incident. And I had never seen this fact before, but in one report from an eyewitness there said that over that small ship that had the hieroglyphics on it, that there were actually 3 aliens in a beam of light that were making repairs to the object on the ground, and it was sort of floating in the beam of light. I had never heard that version of the story before, and this was in Stringfield's diaries from somebody that wrote him a letter about that. Another thing, we came across several places, several Air Force bases where very credible sources were advising Stringfield that crash retrievals were housed at certain Air Force bases, including Edwards and Norton Air Force Base, and also Fort Riley. And there's an extensive story with the Fort Riley incident, because the person guarding the hangar where the craft was stored went into incredible detail with Stringfield used an alias, appeared on multiple radio shows in the 1970s, and I believe that story made his crash retrieval series of books later on. Also, we have evidence that the United States may have had in 1968 and 1969 in their possession a possible cyborg. Where the cyborg came from, we're trying to analyze now. People who are mentioned in the diaries as being at this particular place, we've made contact with some family members. They're giving us some more information, and we intend on releasing it at the symposium.
It's fantastic.
Commander, have you ever heard anything about a cyborg?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you are willing to read and think about what is being said, the famous case in Mississippi, where the two gentlemen that were in the fishing boat, they were pretty quickly and very unfairly, as far as I'm concerned, they got the redneck hillbilly approach pretty quickly when they were being talked to, because when they finally when the last survivor came out, he talked about how these beings moved around. They had these claw-shaped hands, and he said that they looked like what was on a crayfish or a lobster. And instantly people, are just discarding these guys. Well, if you think about what they were talking about, and you talk about mechanical or robotic type apertures that are on there, that kind of makes sense to me. That you may not have the dexterity of a hand type shape thing, but you may have a mechanical thing that can do work. And you see that when you go into places when they're working with everything from radiological material behind the screen to biological stuff, in manipulating stuff around. So that doesn't surprise me. I've heard that. And the Riley case is interesting because it reminds me a lot. It's not that far away from the Coyle incident, where you have the helicopter that had the encounter with the UFO during the Vietnam years. Was a Huey, and the crew talked about it, and that one kind of got into the news, and it was well documented, and then it was just kind of left alone.
Yeah, amazing. Padre, it's amazing that what we're doing now is pretty much what's been told in the past. We're working with, neurological implants and things that we could do that. So now we see in the past, and I'm trying to think of the name that that Bob was talking about, the two guys that were fishing. One of them
was it Pascagoula?
Yeah, Pascagoula.
Pascagoula.
It was Calvin Hicks or I'm getting the names mixed up.
Calvin is the one. Yeah, Calvin was great. I got to tell you real quick, Padre. I interviewed Calvin, and he talked about Commander. He talked about the cyborgs, but he said this woman came out, this woman alien. He goes, Chris, this woman alien came out, and she was gonna do something with my throat. And I tell you, if I had 5 or 6 beers in me, I would have asked her out. I couldn't even go on with the show. I was laughing hard.
I guess that's what interplanetary beer goggles, whatever that is.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how that even works.
That's perfect.
All the aliens look good around closing time. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to leave it.
5 or 6 beers, Chris, and I would have asked her out. I go, okay.
And that segues us into the hybrid program, the alien-human hybrid program, right?
Yeah,
how that happens.
But there's something to what Calvin's saying, because we're actually doing that now. We're at stages with Elon Musk doing implants and things of that nature. So why wouldn't an advanced race have the same thing? Robotics and cyborgs and everything else. I mean, we're just leading into that area now, where we could be replacing in the near future. They're saying we could be replacing human body parts with artificial parts or cloning body parts, as aliens, may have done.
Well, the technology that you're talking about, Chris, I saw a bulletin from the Ukraine battlefield last week. It was the first recorded history of an all automated weapon system engagement between the two sides. Both Russia and Ukraine fielded some ground force droids or drones, or what do you want to call them, and they had a full-on battle that did not involve humans. It was these machines fighting each other in Ukraine. So I mean, the sci-fi movies we watched in the 60s and 70s are coming to
true
fruition right now. And when you mentioned about, where's this going to go from a medical perspective, we're already looking at 3D printing human organs.
Sure.
And manufacturing compatible replacement organs that have the same genetic makeup as the person who needs it, and given enough time, we're going to be able to live much longer by just swapping out the parts. What intrigues me about the Pascagoula incident, too, if I recall the sketches that the gentleman made, these creatures or robots, whatever they were, had like cones sticking out where their ears would be. And, that takes you back into thinking about, okay, some kind of a radio reception apparatus there, that they might be picking up signals from somewhere. Because if you've got something that is a robot, and it either has to have the ability to think autonomously, or there has to be somebody who is watching it, or line of sight or something, that is able to control it and have it respond to the various stimuli around it. And I wonder to what extent there would have been another party, extraterrestrial or otherwise, that would have had to been nearby that was manipulating those.
That'd be interesting to see. I mean, we're going in a direction where human beings will probably live to 100, 150 years. These intelligent beings have told abductees that they live for 500, 600, 700 years. It'd just be amazing if we can get ourselves, past, 120, 130. Some people made it, but that's would be an incredible feat, don't you think, Commander?
It might be. It's not something I personally look forward to. I guess I don't know why. I can't give you a really good answer.
I've got.
It doesn't surprise me that we would probably see those advances in there. And of course, then there's the other spectrum of it. If you could upload all of your mental capacity into a digital basis, would you still be alive? Would you now you've been placed into a computer, in quotes, computer-based life form, and now you're put there. And of course, then there's the physiological melding, as we've talked about, of like the brain with the computer devices. And of course, for me, and probably not speaking for the Padre, but there is a divine aspect that I find very troubling in all that as well.
You're sure?
We were just talking about this as a family yesterday, that Ray Kurzweil, who's done a lot of research into the melding of humans with machines, saying that we won't have death after 2030, that we'll have the capability with the computer systems to basically download you into a machine, and so that your kids and grandkids could interact with you, this machine that would be you inside the machine.
Right.
And my response was, so what you're telling me is that 300 years from now, my great whatever grandson is going to boot up the machine and hear me cry, "Vote for Trump," or something like that. What's the relevance? I don't know.
What if you have a power surge and the power goes out? Did you
exactly? I made that case as here comes the
grandpa's
lady
down
with the vacuum and unplugs it from the wall, and whoops, I guess we do have death.
My grandpa needs to be rebooted.
Yeah.
And here's the one thing I want to ask this before we go to break, and then we're going to get into Bob and Orbs and something from Lockheed Martin. And I'm going to ask Bob this too. We are getting so advanced that we can basically make humans. I mean, we've made sheep and everything else. Because we're all three of us, or all four of us, are very spiritual. Do we make a human person without a soul? I'm going to start with you, Padre.
No, it wouldn't be human. I mean, there is this, if you will, image of God or God's spark in every human being, and that cannot be manufactured. If you look at the ability to create an actual sentient being that has the same feeling and ability to interact, I just do not see that as being there.
Well, we've made sheep. I mean, we've made animals.
Well, through
And
cloning, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, we've done that, and maybe we'll be able to clone humans too. But boy, I think that's
it's
such.
scary, isn't it?
It is, because why would you want to make a human being without a soul? I mean, what
Oh,
do you,
I think that's pretty I think that's pretty understandable. Most of the people that would be involved in that don't believe we have souls, and they're looking to be God in a lowercase g. So that one's no big surprise to
I
the.
think if you go right down to Congress, I bet you could find a few of those people. But I don't want to get into politics on this show.
yeah, but you look at the book of Genesis. What's the first lie the devil tells? He says, "Do this, and ye shall be as gods."
Right.
And that's the same lie that he's been preaching through the millennia, and the same thing he's tempting with people now. Do this, and you shall be as gods, and it never ends well.
Commander, what do you think of that?
Well, so if a child is created by in vitro fertilization, does that child have a soul? I think yes.
Yeah. Because it's the same material. I mean, it's the sperm.
Right. It's the same creative action that goes on there. It's just that it's done in a non-traditional way.
Right.
But if you don't do it in the non-traditional way,
I don't think. I really hate standing in for God. I really do. I've never really been comfortable with this. I will never put forth anything that we create in our philosophies, our interpretation of what we're supposed to be doing on this planet and in this universe that is, I believe, created around us and for us to go and do the right thing. That God is not in charge of that. To be said, I think you can have non-God activities that result in the manifestation of life that is void of soul or is of evil being. So I think that that's like saying, well, do ETs have souls? I would assume yes, because I would assume that ETs are of God's creation. That's how I view that.
Yeah.
If there's evil ones out there, maybe they're in league with Satan. I don't know. I did have an interesting talk with an author one time where I said to him, I think a really good book that you could write really well is an ET comes here and is possessed by a demon and has to go through an exorcism by our ritual because the ET where he came from or it came from didn't have that kind of a problem. They are exposed to it here.
Bob,
I'll see that written someday.
Good.
Well,
Bob, I know you're a very spiritual guy. We've had lots of talks. What do you think about, could we make a soulless person?
I do. As a matter of fact, when Don is mentioned in Stringfield's diary, that's diary 63, near the very end, it goes a lot into what the little grays are, that possibly they're some sort of plant-based, they use photosynthesis for energy and possibly human blood and stuff. And if you go to the Bible, basically, what are demons? They're disembodied spirits, okay? They need a body to enter. If you want to take a really sharp left turn here, it's a little gray alien that soulless would be the perfect vehicle for a demon to enter into, which is another theory I have, that possibly these creatures may be from the future and they were programmed exactly that, to cause havoc in our time. I also wanted to, before we go to break, I just wanted to mention, you got to look up a video on YouTube called Brain Bridge. And it's basically about, within 5 years, they'll be able to take a head and attach it to any body. And they said that as long as it keeps getting new bodies, we could conceivably live for 700-800 years, going back to what Dan said. All right. The problem with that, in my mind, is if kids say are being abducted crossing the border for organ harvesting. Okay, who's going to really benefit in the future from head transplants? It's going to be very rich people. So where are you going to get the bodies from? You're going to have to harvest entire people.
Sure.
Head transplants. So I see a very dark future ahead. I'm a pessimist when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Well, I tell you, if I have a
Look up Brainbridge, the video Brainbridge. It's a company, and it shows you exactly how they're going to attach. It's scary. It's like
It is. It's horrible.
Yeah.
To me, it's freaking horrible.
All right. We'll take this on the other side of the break, but people stay tuned because this is getting really a little strange and exciting. So we'll be back right after the break.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Not hearing you, Chris.
Oh, there we go. We're back to UAP Crossfire. Somebody was screwing around with my mic. Anyways, I want
to be that little gray that's behind you.
Don't say that. I don't like that. No.
Okay, he's gone now. Don't worry.
Here's the thing: when you talk about exorcisms and stuff like that, that puts chills up there. I watched The Exorcism when it originally came out. I had 3 nights I had to sleep with the lights on. Okay, because that I don't play with that stuff. That stuff is nasty stuff. No Ouija boards in my house. Anyways, I want to play this clip because I found this very fascinating. If we have this technology, I wanted to ask you, Commander, about this because, I've never been a pilot. I don't know anything about aviation. You do, but I find it very fascinating. So let me play this and let me get all your thoughts.
Lockheed Martin has invented a technology for planes that allows the plane to literally change shape, grow, change color, charge itself without any wires, and also potentially fly autonomously, which for us sounds a lot like what we perceive to be UFOs. They've developed a technology called the skin of an aircraft, and it's not like your traditional paint job that's a protective layer over the plane. This acts like a living organism, and it can literally allow the plane to change shape on demand. It's more of a muscular material. So what happens is the plane has an intuitive ability to sense when the plane needs to change shape. So imagine it'd be like if you had a couch that sensed that you needed a nap, and so it changed into a recliner. This is all possible because of the plane's advanced sensors and data flow that are built into the skin using no wires. It is because of this advanced technology that the plane is also able to change color in seconds and also potentially fly autonomously. They believe these planes will fly in packs and are smart enough to communicate and learn from each other while mid-flight. So next time you're out and you think you're seeing UFOs, you might just be seeing Lockheed Martin testing out this new technology. Also, if they're announcing this technology to the public, it makes you wonder what type of technology is out there being. This is going to blow your mind. Lockheed Martin has invented a technology for...
Yeah, there we go. Anyways, Commander, what do you think of that technology?
It's not all that surprising. So
do you think we have it?
We have degrees of it. There's no doubt about that.
So a lot of things that we see in the sky could very well be ours then, especially if it's changing shape,
absolutely,
changing color.
So let me take you all the way back to World War I. World War I, they were really concerned about ways that they could fly their airplanes and not be seen. And there was a phenomenon that went on in World War I called the ghost ships. And
really?
What they did is they had clear material, not painted skins. They were cloth, they were linen. And they never painted them. And what you saw was a much more like a skeleton of the aircraft when it flew. And the reason they did that is because it would not show up against the sky very well. During World War II, they experimented with lights on the leading edges and on the airplane to match the background light to cloak its appearance. And of course, we have stealth technology going on today. There is an aircraft that is being tested right now that does not have what we would call standard control surfaces. And the standard control surfaces are deflecting air over the wings and the fuselage and on the tail, ailerons, flaperons, flaps, slats, all those kinds of things. So what they're experimenting with now is electrical charges on the skin of the airplane to affect the airflow. And the reason you want to do that is it's going to reduce drag. Now, some of the stuff they talk about in there, the practical questions they ask, that's great, but where is the power source coming from this? Because this is a tremendous amount of energy that's required. Then I will take you to my final stop, the Tic Tac.
Yeah, exactly.
That really demonstrates that we have probably cracked some element of this, but we're not flying these aircraft. Everything you saw in that video is bending air. It's moving air molecules. When you look at the Tic Tac, I don't see them doing that. Not by its shape. Its shape is not very aerodynamic. Not by the way it flies. Not by the way it affected sensors looking at it. I think you've crossed into another area. And the reason you don't see more Tic Tacs is that either A, they're so prohibitively expensive, we don't have a lot of them. I think it probably requires a lot because I think that they're manned. I think that they're crewed. I don't think they're completely autonomous yet. And it may be so destabilizing to the world as we see it right now. And I told you that's my theory on a lot of the stuff that we have going on.
You made me a believer on the Tic Tacs.
If you have a power source that could replace oil, it will destroy the planet as we know it, because we will come to an absolute screeching halt because we have got ourselves stuck on an oil-based economy right now.
Right.
Okay.
And even more now when we go drill, baby, drill.
Right. But that's because that's how we've got a world economy established, and that's what we're fighting for. And I don't think everybody has completely cracked that code on that. But if that was out there, it's going to be introduced at a time and a place when people that are able to control it are going to be able to transition to it and either maintain order or maintain some kind of power, political, economic position. So all that stuff we saw there is capable. I have seen for years different attempts on skin camouflage techniques that are out there.
But what about changing shape?
We change shape all the time. B-1s change shape all the time. F-14 change shape. F-111s change shape. They swung their wings. Helicopters change their shape by the way they move their rotor blades. It's not all that impossible and not all that improbable. There was a thing called the Mission Adaptive Wing that was tested in the 80s. And what they did is they physically changed the camber. That's the curvature of a wing. So that when you were in flight, you could actually bring it to a much more critical airfoil shape, which was better for the cruise flight and got you much greater distance. But you needed to fatten that wing back up to its more normal standard shape when you wanted to land because you wanted to be able to fly slower. That's the reason why the wings move on things like B-1s. They swing forward because it lowers the speed so that you don't have to use as long a runway to get in or to take off, to land or take off. Technology is there, refinement is there. Usually the problem with it is it's not practical for what you want to do because of the weight that's involved, the mechanical requirements that you have more areas for failure. The F-14 had to prove that it could fly with one wing stuck forward and one wing swung back. It's a very, very impressive picture taken out over Long Island. Look it up. It's incredible. The test pilot has the one wing locked forward and the other wing is back.
Well, there's footage of an F-15 that landed in Israel with one wing gone.
Right.
So, when you talk about changing shape in flight, that's what birds do all the time. I mean, they take a variety of in-air configurations to accomplish.
One of the aircraft that was in that video is the giant airship, which pretty much everybody's abandoned. If you want to see a very funny video, you can go on. There's one of these giant airships flying in Britain. They call it the slow motion crash, and it's coming in nose down to the field, and it's sort of like watching like ice cream melt. It's really kind of funny to watch. No one gets hurt, so it's worth watching. So that's there. There's all kinds of technology there. But remember, I think we are at the precipice of no longer using air pressure as the way to move aircraft.
What would be your theory of what we're using?
We have anti-gravity, or we have something that allows us to do that and travel in a completely different methodology.
Padre.
And it goes along with all the things of building the plasma field around aircraft, or if they're in air and they're in water, or whatever the craft is that allows it to go to high speeds. I think that's where we're at. I think that's what we're knocking on.
Padre, your final thoughts on this?
Well, in my second novel, Species Unleashed, I unveil a futuristic aircraft that is able to attain much higher speeds by using layers to modify the temperature of the air in front of it that it's flying into. And also, another one I'm working on is with a submarine that is able to attain higher speeds because it creates a bubble around itself, if you will. And, that's kind of what we've been talking about with some of these UAPs, the theory that you are in some way removing yourself from the element that you're traveling through, or creating something between you and the element that you're moving through. And if I'm understanding Commander Cobra, I think that's what he's talking about.
Sure.
You're doing something that is a complete departure from our understanding of how flight has taken place by introducing something that somebody has thought of, but it's hard to explain or conceptualize unless you actually see it in action.
So let me give you the example.
Okay.
You have man on horseback.
Okay.
As the ultimate and most understood form of movement. And now we create an internal combustion engine which produces useful torque that can be used to drive a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of departure I'm telling you that I think we're seeing from using things with wings and airfoils to where we are now, or what we're approaching now, where you're no longer blasting air or trying to accelerate air and change pressure over different parts of a vehicle to have more pressure on the bottom of it. That's what makes a wing fly, or throwing air away and having the opposite reaction to keep it in the air. We're going into a different kind, as different as horses are to combustion engine. That's the kind of change we're making aerodynamically. And quickly, Padre, when you launch a missile out of a submarine, you put an air bubble around it to accelerate it out, because you don't want it to go through the water medium. So a large bubble capsule is around it, and as the motor lights, there's a little boost that throws it up. Once it gets in the air, that's when it fires its rocket motor and gets out of the water, and off to business it goes. So we're kind of doing that already, just in a slightly less sophisticated way than you're indicating.
But if we look at the dynamics of flight, the four forces, you have lift versus gravity, you have thrust versus drag. Are you saying that for an object moving through our atmosphere, we're going to have to reimagine that, or that model of physics around a flight has to change completely?
So what I'm saying is you're still opposing your gravitational pull. So you have something that is opposing that. To call it lift might not be the right term to use, but you're opposing that. And then to not deal with things like skin friction, which is the drags that you're doing. And when you produce lift, you produce drag, plus then you have the dynamic drag of something moving through the medium of air. If you have a strong enough power source, you're able to accelerate very, very quickly. And this has been reported in undersea vehicles as well, at these extremely high speeds. That's a much thicker medium, water, than air. So it's requiring some kind of manipulation of the environment around that. So if you set up a void, as you were indicating for the book, that's what I think is happening here. It's just completely different. And the reason you're able to get the combustion engine to be so much superior to the horse, in some respects, I think horses are superior in many others, is that you have an incredible amount of power for the amount of weight that is being displaced.
How do you theorize we'd overcome the heat of friction?
I think you put up a force field around it that allows you not to. You have a vacuum around it, and you're not actually having skin friction.
Interesting.
And that's why I think it can be occupied, because if you have this source, you're creating a field inside the vehicle that allows the occupants not to feel the G-force. It's not working that way. It's like a buoyancy kind of situation that you're creating.
Amazing.
Mind-blowing.
Maybe. All right. Well, let's get to Orbs. Bob.
Yes,
Orbs. You're considered. Go ahead.
I wanted to say a couple of points on what they were just talking about before we go to Orbs, if you don't mind. The commander mentioned about camouflage. And last time I was on, we discussed the chevrons, because when people see these chevron-shaped craft, all right, they're almost invisible. Right. And the commander said it may be because it's like a projector screen on the bottom, maybe taking a picture of the clouds above it to make the object look almost invisible. Remember that conversation?
Yep. And there has been some experimentation to try to produce that kind of exterior skin.
And the other thing I want to mention is that the Chinese have that sub now that could conceivably go 767 miles per hour, and basically it puts a bubble in front of it, and it uses lasers to create detonations behind it to throw it forward. So instead of a normal submarine taking like 130 hours to go from China to San Francisco, this new Chinese technology can get it there in 8 hours.
Yeah, I'm not buying that one. Sorry, Bob.
No, okay. I just read it. It's going to be the new MUFON newsletter coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I'm not buying that for a bunch of reasons, especially unless there's some unbelievable breakthrough that they have with power source. And if they do, then I want to know why they're building a coal plant every week to convert coal into electricity, if they've got this ability to go from San Francisco from China to San Francisco in less than the flight time. I have a hard time with that one.
To throw my 2 cents in, I think the only reason they have the technology they have, they've been stealing it from us for years.
Well, I think steal is such an ugly word when we have so many people within our government and industry that are willing to sell it to them.
Yeah, that's true too. Greed.
Well, if you're going 700 miles an hour under the water, you're not going to go very far before you rear end a whale. That's going to end the ride pretty fast.
You have to do an environmental impact study.
Yeah.
Well, if you are deflecting the way Bob is talking, and this is the same thing I'm talking about in the air, the whale is not going to get in the way. The whale is going to be pushed out of the way. That's the point. Now,
whales weigh a lot, Commander.
Huh?
Whales weigh a lot.
Yeah. Again, they're buoyant. They're buoyant though when they're doing that. They are approaching neutral buoyancy because of this displacement. If you're displacing that around you, you are not actually touching it around. I know it sounds like hocus pocus, but we do this, and it happens in a vacuum. So I can easily see how this is to work. It's just that it requires a huge amount of energy to do that. And that also means the signature for that energy production is going to be noticeable in the realm that we operate in. That's why I call BS on some of these claims of these super parts. And of course, going back to Chris, I've yet to see the PRC to really develop something on their own. They're excellent.
I agree.
At adapting and building, especially when they have blueprints and technology that's past them. One last thing, kind of a funny thing, and I need to. This friend is long since departed. He was in the film industry, and he would often have to quickly, with using a very small set of aircraft, have different aircraft available for the scenes that were being filmed in the movie. And I asked him, "How do you do that?" They took Future floor wax, Kiwi shoe polish, and they created a spray-on camouflage paint. And the reason they did that was, you want your spray on, it's not toxic, it's not a bad thing. And then when you were done, you just washed it off. You got fairly warm water and you ran it, and there you were, your original pretty paint scheme underneath your helicopter or airplane. And I may go as far as to say that I may have actually tried that in some of the ops that I was involved in at later dates that we needed to blend in a little bit better, and we didn't have the right color. So just throw that in.
Kiwi shoe polish, you said?
My wife has it all solved. She just wanted to pass that earlier when I was telling her what the show was on tonight. She said, well, obviously they're the spirits of people that have passed. That's what orbs are. So, Bob, I don't know what you're going to say, but my wife, with pretty complete certainty, passed out what that was. And she's, she just wanted to pass.
And she's listening to you, Bob.
Well, I can answer that. Good. Number one, the orb phenomenon is not one phenomenon. It's multiple. And some of it goes from the natural to the anomalous. Okay, you have will-o'-the-wisp, swamp gas ignited type natural phenomenon. You have ball lightning. All right. Some people claim that those cemetery orbs they're captured on film. That's just dust speck out of focus when a flash goes off in front of a camera and it looks like an orb. So you can count them out. Then there's also the mimicry with orbs turning into things. There are orbs that turn into actual craft. There are orbs that turn into little gray aliens or tall Nordics. Okay, there are orbs that have been seen to carry people away as they're dying. So I believe that the orb phenomenon is a vast spectrum of things. Technologically, when we get some orb reports, the most famous one being the FedEx case in Mexico in 2018, where the orb was following a FedEx plane till it got to the United States border and shot off. And I think we discussed this last time too with Commander Cobra. The object was probably some sort of spherical craft enveloped in a plasma to avoid radar detection, because on the TCAS anti-collision radar in the cockpit of the FedEx plane, there was nothing showing, but the object was right outside the window. So I rule nothing out when we talk about orbs, and that's when I'm at the symposium this coming July in Cincinnati, I'm going to be doing field investigator training on that topic. I can tell you that probably over 90% of all orb sightings in the MUFON database are not anomalous. Okay, there's maybe 10%, and there's different reasons for that. But most can be solved. I mean, the biggest culprit for solving an orb case in MUFON is that it's a Chinese lantern on the 4th of July. Okay, and 4th of July, January 1st is when you see most orbs. That's when most people are doing fireworks shows. That's when they're launching the lanterns or the drones that people think are, glowing orbs. So I'd say 90% of all orb cases right off the bat can be solved.
Yeah, but that last 10%, man,
that last 10% is a
lot of fun.
It's a lot of different things too. It's just not one thing. I mean, we had a case in New Jersey where a woman went into her backyard, and she realized that 10 feet away from her there was this orange churning plasma ball, and it seemed to have almost like a bell-shaped aura around it. And when she saw it, she screamed. Immediately, this ball of plasma jerked away and went up as if to get away from her. All right. So that suggests that it was sentient. It was aware of her, and it reacted to her. Okay. In 1905 in Wales, there was this woman who was a preacher. She'd go around Wales speaking. I can't think of her name off the top of my head. And when she was in the church, orbs used to appear over the church, whether it's some sort of paranormal spiritual thing. And when she would come out and get in her horse-drawn wagon, drive away, the orbs would follow her. And if the road went to the left, the orbs would go to the left. It's almost as if they knew her and wanted to be in contact with her. Then there was the fellow, he's dead now, but he used to be in California, where he told this news crew, I can summon orbs anytime you want. And they didn't believe him. So they put out a film crew, and within 5 minutes, this guy summoned an orb. Prophet Yahweh was his name. They were so impressed, and they got so many calls at the television station that they decided to do a second episode on the guy. And they got a call from the government and said, we want you to squash it. And that was the end of that story. So what was it that this guy was actually summoning?
Wow.
I have a question for you, Bob. There's a new term that I've been hearing lately, and I wasn't familiar with it. First came across it during the New Jersey drone thing. Plasmoid, the idea of some orbs being actual living entities. Is that a term that you've encountered, and can you maybe explain it?
I never heard the term plasmoid, but I can tell you that there are plenty of cases, not only in the CMS, the MUFON CMS database, but also in the books of a fellow, Albert Rosales. He does this series of humanoid encounters, the Others Among Us books. There's 15 of them, and they're fascinating. One particular case that comes to mind is a man, I believe it was in Italy, was out on his balcony, and he sees two orbs coming towards his balcony. He backs up. They come onto his balcony, and they turn into two little people. He actually drew a picture of them. And the one entity says to the other one, he is sick, heal him. And they touch him, they turn back into orbs, go away, and he finds out that his cancer was cured. Okay? One of the things that happens just prior to an abduction, a bedroom abduction of people will wake up, they'll either see a flash of blue light, a flash of white light, or they'll see small blue and white orbs, and they'll be floating over the person's face, and then they will materialize into little grays at the foot of the bed. So yes, I believe that plasmoids can be, there's actually two stories where these plasma objects actually take people away the night they died. All right. In Wales, they used to be called corpse lights. So usually if you saw a corpse light over your house in Wales, that was an indication somebody was going to die that night. But yes, to answer the question, that I have many reports of orbs turning into entities and entities turning back into orbs. And when we had that Chinese balloon shoot down 2 years ago, when they were shooting down these octagon-shaped objects over Lake Huron. We actually had another octagon report from near Fort Knox, Kentucky, where a guy was watching planes go by, and he kept seeing these orbs following the plane every couple of minutes. This blue orb would be behind a passenger jet. And the third time, he actually witnessed the orb turn into a craft. So not only do orbs turn into entities, orbs can turn into craft. And that leads up to the obvious questions, like, what are they made of if they can do things like that?
Or are they putting up a force field, what you're seeing, like we talked about with the UPS aircraft, that shields them from radar and other parts, and then when that comes down, when that shield is no longer being used, that shell goes away, and now what's inside, the prize inside, is seen.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that seems a fairly straightforward answer to why you see that turning into it, because you're manipulating. Think back to Tic Tac. You had sensors on that, and it really was causing it. Well, at least I'm led to believe by what I've seen there and what I heard the crews talking about, that you're seeing the light around it often being warped, and then other times they got a very good look at the vessel itself. So it wouldn't surprise me that if you have the ability to cloak out by putting an orb around it, so that fits in my mind as a pretty possible way that you're handling that. Why you're seeing that go that way.
Bob, are there classifications of orb, like when we talk about aliens, you got Greys, you got Nordics, reptilians, and so forth. With the orbs, they're the small ones that look like they're metallic. Then there are the sort of translucent ones that seem to have like little lightning thing going in it. And then you've got various colors. Do you classify orbs?
To my knowledge, no one's ever done that, but I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that it would be very easy to. You have the abduction orbs, you have the TCAS radar evading orbs, you have the natural phenomena orbs, you have the seemingly sentient orbs. Some of these orbs seem to act as if there's some sort of probe. Some orbs are attracted to fireworks, okay? And we actually have videos of this. And that's because fireworks contain small amounts of radioactive material, and that maybe some of these orbs are some sort of scout ships, almost like the Nest sniffer drones, and they're seeking out a radioactive trace, all right? So, and you also have different color orbs. You have, the most predominant is red-orange, okay? But you can go all the way down to like purple.
Yeah, right? The full spectrum of the visible light spectrum.
Yep, and that may have something to do with, let's say there's a craft inside the plasma field. It's an actual craft. It may have something to do with the propulsion system when it takes off. In the FedEx case, the object was outside the cockpit window for 33 minutes, and then just before it made a right turn and shot away to the left rather than go over the U.S. border, it turned purple. So there was obviously some sort of propulsion mechanism that activated a color change in that type of orb. But yeah, I mean, there's 100 different classifications of orbs. Maybe that'll be my next project, Dan.
Okay.
Bob, something interesting that you said was that an orb actually healed somebody. Mm-hmm. But we've also talked, and you said that an orb actually destroyed a village. Mm-hmm. Am I correct on that?
I'd say that there's benevolent orbs, and I'd say that there's malevolent orbs.
Tell us how an orb destroyed a whole village.
In the 1970s, you caught me off guard with that question, so I don't know the exact year. It was Salidare, Ethiopia, and this small village, daytime orb, glowing orange-red, went down the main street. And as it went down, it ripped up all of the asphalt on the road, and some of the facades of the buildings caved in. A little girl actually died that day from it. What made it really interesting is that it wasn't a natural phenomenon, is that when it got to the end of the village, it turned around and came back down and caused more damage. So it was definitely sentient. As a matter of fact, Heineck and Valet went to Ethiopia, and they investigated it on site, and they both came to the conclusion that it was a CE4, a violent interaction with an orb. All through history, all right? Orbs have done things like interfere with battles, all right? As a matter of fact, in the 1930s, this is a very, very famous story at the time, but nobody knows it now. It was a big Sunday pullout in the New York Daily News. A couple moved from California to New York to get away from this woman that they believed was a witch, and they used to put newspapers over their windows to try to keep these orbs out that they thought were being sent by this witch, and that these orbs would burn their skin. Finally, the wife couldn't take it anymore. She went into a hair salon where the alleged witch was, shot her dead. Interestingly enough, they were never bothered by orbs again. She went to jail for a while, but got off. Her husband ended up going to a mental institution and never got out again.
So wait a minute. So this person gets shot, and the orbs never come back?
Never come back. This is in the New York Daily News from the 1930s.
Wow.
Interesting case.
What happens?
Tell us about Foo Fighters.
Oh, Foo Fighters. Ooh.
Well, what's interesting about Foo Fighters is that all through the war, everybody knows that the Germans thought it was the Americans thought it was the Germans, the Japanese thought it was the Americans, the Americans thought it was the Japanese, and they would basically be on one side or the other of a wing. And you would think that if it was so predominant during the war that all of these aerial fighting machines were seeing these orbs, that till today we should be seeing them almost on every commercial air flight, right, off the wing. And we don't, and that's very curious, because it suggests that these orbs, these Foo Fighters, may have been sentient and were interested in what the fighter planes were doing, and you don't see it today. It's like, why not?
Commander, you have a question for Bobby?
No, I've always enjoyed Bob's explanation on the Foo Fighter, because everybody thought it was the other guy that had it.
Yeah, the German. They always thought the Germans had some.
Yeah, the mild panic.
I'll tell you my Foo Fighters story.
All right.
There used to be a video game I played a number of years ago. It was Jane's World War II Fighters Flight Simulation.
Yeah.
And here I am, I'm, in my P-38 Lightning battling ME-109s, and my mission is over, and I'm heading back to base. And all of a sudden, there on the screen appears this flying saucer right in front of the aircraft. They had written that into the software, right, where you would encounter these strange craft. And I thought that was pretty clever of them.
Yeah, and there are I've read a lot of Foo Fighter reports. I think Barry Greenwood has a bunch of them on his website. They weren't all like glowing plasma balls. Some of them were silver spheres. They were described as silver spheres. So, in a sense, many of them, if not all of them, could have been some sort of advanced craft that was doing surveillance on German, Japanese, and American fighters during the war. I mean, we have stories, of military bases being, surveilled constantly. Objects landing on runways at military bases. I did an entire article on dozens of.
We just recently had a show where our nuke sites were visited, and that falls into this category. But it's interesting that from the World War I on, especially when we start to see aircraft, this aerial phenomena of the orb showing up, and in many cases engagement. There are reports in World War I of actually firing kinetic rounds, causing damage. So the orb got a surprise. Didn't figure it was going to work out the way it did, and got a surprise kind of thing. This goes on, and wartime seems to generate the war machine of our civilization seems to generate a lot of attention. And brings up a lot of interloper kind of engagement to look at it. Also, I think in many ways, Bob, we also replicate this at a much lower degree, but we do this. I remember it must be 25, maybe even more years, where the Mexican Air Force came out and said that they had filmed and they had encountered a UFO. They were flying over Mexico, and something came up alongside them. They got pictures of it. it was, I'm 99.9% sure it was our aircraft from the United States. I don't think it was another military power in this hemisphere that did it. But they snuck up on that aircraft. They did not give any kind of a radar signature. And of course, in those days, we didn't use TCAS but there were ways to cloak it out quite a bit. And they were in a fairly low radar surveilled area of where this occurred. So this kind of action is not uncommon. RC-135s used to do this kind of thing all the time. In fact, it probably was a contributing factor to the KL-007 shoot-down, because these planes would penetrate into the then Soviet Union, and then when they were detected by the Soviets, they would immediately get as close as they possibly could, or follow the track of airliners, so that they would be able to cloak out, and they would change their configuration by the way they had their lighting showing up on the aircraft to look like airliners to get away. One of the famous stories is one of the guys in that was going to get a tanker. They were getting ready to hit a tanker, and he lined up on a civilian airliner because the tanker was blacked out. He was blacked out. They were using their radar to try to get to it. They don't talk because they don't want to give away their position by radio. And they got up close, and they saw the Pan Am or the Trans World or whatever Korean Airlines logo, and they knew they had the wrong aircraft. These are big airplanes, same size, basically airliner-based airplanes. So the Orbs may be the original activity, but we do the same kinds of things for the reason of intelligence or reconnaissance or whatever the reason. So it logically fits in my mind what you're saying, Bob. It fits very, very well.
What's your opinion then on with the New Jersey drones? People were saying suddenly there were orbs also associated with the drones. What's your take on that? There was mimicry going on.
So, that is such an absolute mess, as usual, on everything that we have. Number one, whatever the events that are behind that, which we probably won't know for a long time, it's obviously that a good portion of it was understood, known, authorized, planned, and scheduled. It could be something as simple as trying to prove that drone delivery of product, to residences and businesses, testing in that corridor to get ready to go to that next level of activity. Then you have the next part, we have people joining in. And then anytime we seem to have a large amount of human activity like this, it attracts this other element that shows up. And if you probably remember, only folks like yourself that are kind of plugged into the subject really report it much or registered the orb kind of thing that was going on. And I think some of it was very simply the lighting systems of people with hobby drone activity got in there because everybody wanted a piece of the action. There were airplanes. There were purposely flying airplanes in the pattern with those drones if they were doing testing, because that's one of the things they want to prove, that if you could do this, you won't have midair collisions. Of course, now the ultimate question, and I'll say it and I'll let it drop to the floor, like an orb that's no longer flying. Why didn't they just come out and tell us right off the bat what was going on? I think there was a nefarious reason for that, but that's.
Do you? There's a theory going out there, I've been told, that these drones were looking for radioactive material, and that these were what they call nest drones. Now, nest has to go out on every call that has a radioactive material to it. So, right. Yeah, I mean, even a puddle that has a blip of radioactive material, nest has to be notified, and they have to put it on their website. Now, obviously, when that whole drone thing started, there was material stolen from a container. Now, they downplayed that, said, well, that material is really nothing. Well, I don't know if that's correct or not. Because
no, those were rods that were used in medical work for X-ray.
Could a dirty bomb be made out of it?
Huh?
Could a dirty bomb
Absolutely. I was going to say, if you put that with a large enough kinetic device, C4, some explosive, you will cause a very dramatic radiological incident that would have to be cleaned up and cause all kinds of problems on that. And that's always one of the concerns of the dirty bomb, because it's very easy to control those rods. If you have them in the right kind of container, they won't show up easily on the scaling in the background. You won't get the kind of signature you're looking for. So that's always a problem. But they are on the scale of activities. It's not like you're splitting an atom at that point and causing a fissionable explosion, releasing that kind of energy. You're physically throwing radiologic material out with a standard kinetic, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems.
So thinking strategically, wouldn't it be easier to put up a bunch of drones than to put up airplane sniffers?
Well, you'd use both. I mean, there's a reason for doing it that way. If you are using the helicopters and airplanes that are equipped to do that, it's going to cause a lot of attention. Now, at this point, if you put up drones, you probably have a much smaller feature going on. And then if that is what's going to be the cover story for your drones? Oh, I got it. We won't say anything. Then we'll say that it's not to worry about. We can't tell you what it is, but it's not a crisis. And then you'll put out, hey, this was just a test. We were doing a test right from the start.
But Picatinny didn't know what the drones were. They came out and said it in the statement. So why
and you believe them?
Why would Picatinny be left in the dark? Or do you think that's disinformation?
We had a pending election, Bob.
Oh yeah, I know that.
And we're looking for a reason for that election to go a slightly different direction than it did. My God, New Jersey was in what? 4, 5, 6 points of going for the president of the United States. That's a huge shift. You want to talk about orbs? There you go.
Also, I don't think they, if you said dirty bomb or nuclear device, I think the people would go into a tizzy. I mean, the grocery stores would be raided and everything else, thinking that there was, going to be some pending doom. Don't you think so?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're not going to do well. You're leading me down a path that I don't want to go down. Why that particular part of the country? Why we didn't have that kind of come out? Why we were playing with it?
But I want you to go down that path.
We live in a post-COVID world, and if you're not clicking into the fact that we are post-COVID world, there was a lot that was learned how we behaved in COVID and what people got away with and what they were able to pull off. And now that some of the story behind that is coming out, you have a very angry populace.
It's interesting that the people involved with COVID got pardons before anybody was charged. But anyways, Dan, you look like you got something to say with this. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask Bob while I had him here, because this orb thing intrigues me, is have people come in contact with orbs or suffered any kind of injury or distress as a result of physical contact with them?
Well, yeah, some people suffered burns, like the 1930 story. People suffered burns. Do you know that I've always thought that orbs, or at least certain types of orbs, maybe even ball lightning, because the difference between regular orbs and say ball lightning is a plasma too, but it's ionized. It wants to revert back to its original state, so it'll explode in like less than a minute, at most a minute. Orbs will go on and on and on. All right. But one of the things that's interesting about ball lightning is that ball lightning can come down your chimney. It can come up through your sink. All right. It can come through a closed window. And I've often pondered whether or not these people who supposedly died of spontaneous combustion, that were just sitting in their armchair in the living room and they're burnt to a crisp and nothing else is wrong in the room, could they have come in contact with a ball?
But would ball lightning have that much power? Wow.
Oh, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, sure. It's electrical. I'm sure it could stop your heart too if you come in contact with it.
Wow.
Because when the ball lightning event ends, putting on my meteorologist hat here, there's a thunderclap. I mean,
Right.
it's and the thing that causes the thunderclap from regular lightning is the superheating of the air in immediate proximity to that. So there's a lot about ball lightning we don't understand, but you don't want to touch it because it's deadly electricity. Interesting thought there, Bob, about spontaneous
And the
combustion.
thing is, there's no evidence, right?
Right,
This thing
right.
blew up and's gone. And the old newspaper reports of ball lightning, they don't call it that it exploded. They call it with a large retort, is how the papers in the 1800s called it, which means boom. All right. So,
I've been known to at least some large retorts in my day. Well, Bob, when you mentioned they'd have burns, usually, when you look at somebody who's had a burn, they can classify it. Okay, that's an electrical burn, or that's a fire burn. That any evidence lead to what it is that's causing the burn?
no, I mean you gotta think about the people who MUFON doesn't investigate UFOs. We investigate UFO reports, and a lot of times all you have to go on is the narrative from the witness. So if the ball lightning or the orb is long gone, there's really no way you can physically test how they got that burn, if they got that burn at all from an orb.
Bob, let me ask you a question here. Has there been ancient battles with orbs in the sky?
Yes. All right. Many of you probably familiar with Thutmose III, who was a pharaoh in Egypt. He was probably Egypt's most successful military leader. And there is one dubious story in something called the Tully Papyrus, which no longer exists, and some people think it was just a fraud. But it was apparently seen by several Egyptologists at the time in the 1930s. This guy buys a piece of parchment that tells the story about these fireballs coming in the sky more and more and more each day. And at one point, water and fish and all sorts of stuff are dropping down on Egypt. And I always thought it was like possibly, aliens, and they were just flushing their toilet bowl after they had taken some water out of the Nile River for whatever. And, but the thing is that there's a second story about Thutmose III, and that's literally written in stone in the Gebel Barkal Stela, which tells the tale where his army went out to meet the Nubians from the south, and just as they were about to engage in battle, this white star, the Stela calls it the miracle of the star, this white star comes down and obliterates the enemy army, but Thutmose's army goes untouched. So there was clearly some sort of intent, all right, where that was just one incredible meteor hit that took out one army and not the other, all right. They also think now that it may not have been Ramses who was the pharaoh who met Moses, but that it may have been Thutmose III, and that maybe that there's some sort of biblical connection to what was happening to Thutmose. It happens again with the Romans. With the Romans, I think it was like 70 BC, they were engaged with a battle with the Pontian Empire, which is modern day Turkey. And both armies, the Turks were destroying the Romans battle after battle. And then on this one particular day, they go to battle, and this bright white star comes down in between the two armies, and they both run away in panic. They both regroup. Rome gets its act together, and they wipe out the Pontians, and that's how Rome eventually made it down into Israel. All right, so that's why I've always been big on the manipulation of our timeline, whether or not there's some sort of interference. Yeah, and then it's more. I mean, who's the guy Bruce from Scotland? He was a contemporary of William Wallace, but he was going to fight the British, and the British were holed up at this castle on an island. And he tells his lieutenant, I want you to be a spy. I want you to get to the other side and wave a torch when it's ready for us to attack. So they see this red light, really bright red light, over on the other side of the river, and they attack. And the British decimate them. And when the lieutenant comes back, it's Robert the Bruce. He says, "Why did you betray us?" He goes, "My lord, I never made it over to the other side." All right, he never got there to wave the torch. So what was the bright red light that sort of doomed the Scots against the British? Okay, so there's plenty more incidents, and there's famous people who've seen orbs. So you know, it's fascinating all through history with all the orb stories.
That's amazing. Before we end the show, want to get to the chat. There's a question in chat for Commander Cobra. I want to put this up, and let's see if we can get this answered for her.
In general, they do not.
They do not.
That are configured with that. That is not a widespread system, especially on helicopters. Later on, that system starts to show up. One of the things that they do have on many of the new aircraft that are out is a slightly different avionics-based system that sends out the signal, this ADS-B that you hear so much about, this ADS-B out signal sends out, and it allows other aircraft that do have the system and ground radars to use that and know that you are approaching another aircraft and put a warning out earlier. So the Blackhawk may not have the indications in it as well, but it's sending out enough information that other systems on other aircraft and ground radars could see that and then broadcast it out. So you actually hear the warning go off in the CRJ jet when it goes on. But most do not carry it right now, believe it or not.
And the other question I want, just to make sure we get these answered, I heard she was flying a COG training mission. What's a COG training mission?
I'm not quite sure what that stands for, but
continuity of government.
Say again?
Continuity of government.
Yeah, I was going to say that it sounds like the continuity mission. And what that means is their job, although they move a lot of VIP or dignitaries around, their job is if there's an emergency to pick up and move to very secure locations so that the government, if we're under attack or there's a crisis of any kind, has enough people around to have the government, to have things keep going. I'm quickly putting this up. I don't know how well you can see it.
Oh, wow.
Carrier, and it's showing you the heat and why it's in hovering flight. Now, that doesn't use rotor blades. So I just wanted to throw that up. It's a graphic representation. Obviously, the hot air that's coming out of the bottom of it is the thrust coming out of the engine. Time's up. Great show. Bob, thanks so much.
Bob, thank you so much. What a great show. Thank everybody for watching. Thanks for your questions. Remember, send us your comments. You know, get a hold of Commander Cobra or the Padre or even myself at cdeperno549@yahoo.com, and we'll get them answered for you. For the entire crew here, hey, good night, stay safe, and keep watching the skies.